Will do.
Okay, so yeah, welcome. Thank you everyone for coming. My name's Klaus from Hack Humanity. I do mapathons and hackathons, and today we're going to do a mapathon, and Joe, Sev, and myself will co-facilitate. So in essence, a mapathon's an opportunity for us to map out all of the different projects in and around the Barichara land in the bioregion. And for each of those different projects, we're going to be looking at what are their strengths, like what skills do they already have, and then what are the skill gaps, and also what are the resource gaps. And we're going to be matchmaking for each of these projects from our own collective intelligence or our own resource networks or connections. We think, okay, I know someone that I could introduce that would, solve for this piece. Yeah, and so we're going to go project by project. I think we've got 12 or 14 different projects, so roughly 8 to 10 minutes each project, and we've got some visualizations of that, and Sev's going to share his screen in a little bit, then we'll go through those one by one. The tools we'll be using is Zoom for the video call, and we'll also be using Miro. Has everybody used Miro? Nobody? Yeah. Okay, a lot of people have. Yeah, so it's a pretty easy tool to use, and Sev will give us a little orientation to how to use that. Sev, do you want to share your screen now?
Absolutely. So I'll share my screen. So this is the Miro board that we'll be using, and let me post the link to this in the chat for Zoom. There we are.
Yeah, so you can bring that up simultaneously on your computers.
So
you walk us through this. Yep.
For context, if any of you haven't read it, you don't have to do this now, but this is here just to give you context of what this is about and what we're trying to do here today. So for anyone that just has the Miro board, they can jump in and understand what's happening. But there's three core parts to this. We're here in this Zoom room. We have another platform that we're using to really visualize the locations and the projects that we'll be reviewing. And this is using My Maps. And so this link is located here, and I can also add that to the chat. But this is, I'll just show you this quickly too, and then we'll be jumping back into this to review each project. So this has all of the different projects located on it. We also have the bioregion to really give us the context of what the broader opportunity is here and goal. And we'll be reviewing each project and then getting a sense of exactly what's happening, what the opportunity is, the strengths, the needs, and then coming back to the Miro board. And the way that you can participate, joining us here, is through each of these projects. After we've reviewed them, we'll be using this section of the Miro board. So let me zoom out just so you have the whole picture. There's some images from some of the projects here, and to give you the context, but essentially where we'll be spending most of our time is in each of these columns. So for each project, they're all outlined here. We have a lot. We might not get through all of them. We've kind of prioritized a handful of them, and we'll be going through and spending time sharing insights and perspectives on these three categories and columns. So after we've reviewed a project using My Maps, we'll go here. We're going to start, this is the first one that we'll start with, Biopark Mancora. And there is sticky notes right here. You can always drag a sticky note from the left bar here and add your own. Or you can just click on a sticky note and hit the duplicate button, and that gives you a fresh one right here. But this area here is really to spend time. You can add as much text as you like to this a sticky note, and we can zoom in and see it. the beautiful thing about Miro, you can really get really close and see the context. So don't worry about doing one word. You can really share whatever you think is impactful around these each of these focus points. Which first column will be looking at connections. So who else or what other projects are doing something similar? How should they connect? So after we've reviewed a project, really thinking about what other connections can be made to that project that are relevant. Then we'll stay within this project, move over to the next column, and think about needs. So each project has some stated needs that they're kind of looking at, and we as a group can collectively think about how can we address those needs. And then lastly, looking at the friction points and considerations, what might prove to be a challenge with this project, and how might we overcome those challenges, and what other factors should be considered in terms of thinking bigger picture, or the use of land or other organizations or institutions that are relevant to that project. Just anything else that we really feel is helpful in helping progress that project forward, and in the context of regeneration.
Okay, perfect. And just to set a little bit more context, why are we doing this, right? So this is an active service that we can do as remote human beings from all over the world in advance of a group of people who are going out to Barichara and going to be there in person from the 3rd to the 7th, I think, isn't it? And yeah, so this is some preparatory work that we can help for that process. And also just in general, we all have our own networks, our own skills, our own diverse perspectives that we can help to try and level up the success for this project. So I think we're ready to start with the first one, and I would like Joe to introduce the first project.
Yeah, I'd love to begin by saying that we have about a dozen projects here, but actually there are a lot more in the territory. And these are the ones that we were able to get information gathered for in time for the Mapathon, and also that it would just be too much to try and cover everything that's happening here. And one thing that I want to emphasize is that a lot of these projects are already led by people in ways that collaborate between the projects. And so while the projects are listed as though they're each like an island of activity, they're actually not. So for example, the Bioparque Moncora that we're going to talk about first is also the home of a demonstration field site for the Learning Center in Syntropic Agroforestry, which is another one of the projects that we'll talk about today. And that Center for Syntropic Agroforestry has another field site in a different part of the territory. So we'll end up with these kinds of partial overlap of geography and of theme and of action, and also of personnel, of people doing the work. So I just wanted to name that before we get started, to say that as we go along, if you have any questions to give a richer context, I actually know the projects personally and know the people involved very well. So we can actually dive deeper if you want to get more context than I'll give as an overview. But I'd like to begin with the Bioparque Moncora, which if... I'd
like to just pause, just before we do that, just want to check in, sense check everybody we got on the call. Is everything sounding clear about how the process and how we're going to work? Has anybody got any questions or clarifications?
Yeah.
Okay, all good. Okay, go for it, Joe.
Right. So one thing, Seb, could you just zoom out for a moment so we can, just a little bit, so we can see where the Bioparque is in relation to the town? Because this is a really important part of the Bioparque, is that it is right at the top of the town of Barichara. From where I live, which is right in the middle of town, I can walk to the Bioparque in less than 10 minutes. And it takes me that long because it's steep uphill. But it's only like maybe 200 meters, 300 meters, quarter of a mile distance from my house to the Bioparque. And I wanted to name that as an element of this place because the Bioparque is a 6.5 hectare piece of land that is community owned by an association that has 40 members. And those 40 members are organized as a nonprofit called Asociación Aquí Leopara. And as a member-based organization, this enables the land to be collectively owned in a community fashion. So this is a piece of land that since 2009, they've been reforesting. And while it looks really green here on the map, in 2009, it was bare rock and clay. It was like completely dead after decades of monoculture agriculture and erosion that just wiped away all of the topsoils. And so it was extremely degraded land, and it's now entering its 14th year of reforestation. It's a community space that has water retention infrastructure, some of it with the ponds you can see. This is actually a satellite image that's outdated, so you can't see the food forest, the rainwater harvesting roofs, the agroforestry, or the syntropic agroforestry project, all of which are in the land on the right of this image. That would take up about a fourth of what you can see. So it's actually changed dramatically in the last year. But the key things about the bioparque is that it is a unifying symbol of peace in a region that had a lot of violence in the last century, as some of the wealthiest landowners came together to pool this piece of land and make it available to the community. It's a place that has signs for native trees, where children from the elementary schools and the high schools come and learn about the ecology of the native forest. And up until the present, there have been almost 1,000 students in the last 10 years from local elementary, middle, and high schools, as well as students from universities and cities throughout this part of Colombia who have come to visit and study in the bioparque. And it's a place that was led initially by two women, Camila and Vicky, who are both in their mid-70s and who have been looking for someone to sort of pass the project forward to, as they will eventually, they still go and work there on a daily basis. And there's a man named Don Jesus, who's 70 years old, who's the groundskeeper. But when my family arrived 3 years ago, we became part of a group of younger people who began doing work on the land. So there's the beginning of a transition of management that's slowly building. And so some of the strengths of the bioparque are that it is a natural seed bank and a learning space for the native forests. It's a very visible and accessible place that tourists come and walk the trails. It's absolutely beautiful there. It's right on the edge of town, and it's centrally located between the town and the rural areas. And it's all, like I said, it's the home of a food forest demonstration project and a syntropic agroforestry project. Some of its needs include that the land itself has high taxes, and they've been trying to get nature status reserve that would make it tax exempt. But because of some political problems with the ownership among the 40 members and the corrupt local mayor's office, that's proven difficult. And so they actually need a revenue model to cover their taxes, or a social change model to eventually get to where they can have tax exemption. And so we're very interested in figuring out how the very strong education capacities that it has can eventually become a learning center, where there would be an education coordinator who's hired and on staff that can coordinate all the student groups that already come. They already have about 50 students come from 3 different schools every week right now, and Camila and Vicky manage all of it. So eventually we want to get to the point where they could be replaced by an education coordinator and have some way of creating either revenue or value flow with other projects to make this self-sustaining. And then in terms of infrastructure, I think that they could really benefit from having better tree nurseries and seed banks and other things that could make it an anchor location for helping replicate reforestation practices across the territory. So maybe that'll be my summary of the bioparque for now, unless there are any questions before we go into the mapping.
Yeah, I was curious, this relationship between the city itself, the government of the city, and the schools and this location. Is there any actual relationship and connection via the public school, or is this really a community effort?
This is really a community effort. And just to give you a sense of how the local politics work, back in 2016, the superintendent of schools had an argument with the mayor. It was 2 men bickering over petty things. But because the mayor didn't like the superintendent, he decided to declare that the school was not allowed to send any children to the bioparque, and that continued for 6 years. even though the argument between the two men had nothing whatsoever to do with the schools or with the bioparque. And it wasn't until the superintendent stepped down in March of this year that the teachers, with the permission of their new superintendent, were able to step in and the next week start bringing the students back again. So this sort of petty local corruption and local politics is sort of indicative of Latin America. Anyone who spent time in Latin America knows that this kind of stuff happens all the time. But what that means as a result is that not only do we get no support from local government for the bioparque, like Camila and Vicky have done all of this work in 14 years because Vicky is a very accomplished singer and she would do concerts to raise money for the bioparque. And until we created the Barichara Regeneration Fund, there was no financial support for the bioparque. So it was all just community managed volunteerism of various kinds. We hope to change that in the coming years, but maybe that gives a bit more context on the politics of Barichara.
Camilla and Vicky, are they the main, in terms of labor and the actually completing some of these regenerative projects, is it just them or do they have others that help them out already? I mean, that it seems like one of the needs is more sort of additional help with actually doing the projects on the land, or could you share some insight there?
There's a caretaker named Don Jesus, who's there about 40 hours a week, planting trees and doing maintenance. Although they struggle to pay him the roughly $300 per month that he needs for his income. Like the Barichara Regeneration Fund has covered his salary for the last 2 years. Otherwise, they didn't know where they were going to find the money. And then I've been bringing earth regenerators, and we've had volunteer work crews off and on for the last year and a half. So I think there are opportunities to connect it with the Barichara Ecoversity and with other groups in the future.
And it's tropic agroforestry.
Yeah, and it's in tropic agroforestry. When we did a workshop there in April, we had 30 people participate in the workshop, and they planted 7,000 seeds in 2 days, and were able to establish this demonstration field site. And now we get some volunteer work in the maintenance through the participants of the Centropic Agroforestry Learning Center. So we're starting to make some of those connections. Any other questions about the context? Or Seb, would you like to take it from here and move us over to the mural board? How do we do the next step?
Yeah, anyone else have any other questions about the project? Otherwise, yeah, we can move it over to the mural board now.
Maybe could I just ask, what's the population of Barichara and how is the mayor elected?
So the Barichara has a population of about 7,000 people. 10 years ago, it had a population of about 2,000, so it's grown pretty dramatically. And the main way that the mayor is elected is that he offers to buy television sets for campesino people, and they love him and they all vote for him. And unfortunately, a lot of the people who are environmentally conscious are from Bogota or other parts of Colombia, and they maintain their residency and vote in those other places, or they don't change their voting to vote in Barichara. And I would say those outsiders, the Colombians who would be eligible to vote, comprise maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people in the population.
And are they the ones who are most involved in this biopark in terms of that community ownership?
It's a mix. The 40 members of the association that own the bioparque, probably about 3/4 of them are local people from here, and maybe a third are people from other places but they're all Colombians. And about 80% of the membership is strongly in support of the biopark. So it's a well-protected piece of land, but the association is a defunct and broken member-based organization that needs to rebuild its capacities, which is some slow motion work that we're trying to do.
Thank you.
The land, what, I know this is kind of a difficult question, but what level of, degradation still exists? I mean, is it the goal here in terms of if there was a financial model to sustain this, is it really the maintenance of what's already been done? Or is there really an opportunity to restore and regenerate more degraded land that exists there?
Yeah, up to present, they've planted about 7,000 trees. So they've done a nice job overall. But in the early years, more than 90% of them died because they didn't really know what they were doing. And I was the first person to start doing permaculture type of water retention work and soil building work. And I was with a local person named Felipe. We created the first composting system about 2 years ago. So the beauty of the bioparky is that Camila and Vicky did all of this without knowing what they were doing. And so at this point, it's got a lot of capacity for where it is, but it's got beautiful potential to improve. The topsoils are mostly still red clay, which is a thin layer of topsoil above it from an invasive type of grass called Brachiaria that's so invasive and so intense that it kills all the native bushes and shrubs. So in the food forest, which I've been leading, we've been transitioning to start ecological succession. And we're really showing how to do a full on like ecological restoration, but it's early days. So I would say the land is still fairly degraded, but some parts of the tree structure are starting to form a canopy connection where nearby trees are touching and creating permanent shade below. But it's mostly a 2-layer forest system of just trees and grass, an invasive grass from Africa. So they're not actually creating forest. You know, a forest would have about 10 levels within it. Whereas the food forest system we started a year ago already has 3 or 4 levels within a year because we have ground cover, small shrubs, small trees, and some established trees. So just to show that there's tremendous potential for turning it into something more like a permaculture learning center and to integrate it more with the schools.
Amazing. So let's spend some time here on the Mira board and think about what connections do other projects that are similar to what this initiative in Biopark what other projects can we leverage to either look at financially benefiting and creating that financial structure to support these efforts, expand these efforts, or other models that you think of that have had success in similar situations that might be applicable here. So let's, as a group, spend some time and does anyone know, because I think it might actually be helpful just to spend quiet time and to engage and participate on this Mira board. Joe or Klaus, do either of you know if you can have ability to play music in the background at all? Have you ever done that with Zoom?
I have, yeah, let me look into that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is what Seb's pointing to, and to avoid like groupthink. It's quite nice to just do some solo activity into your own sticky note. So we'll do that for a little bit, and then if people want to have some bright ideas or discuss it, then you can unmute and share that as well. But let's take the first couple of minutes just solo working. I'll look into the music piece.
Spend a few minutes on this connections question, and then we'll move on to the next. So feel free to take your time. And if you aren't able to use Miro, if you're on mobile or it's just being glitchy or not, you're having an issue, feel free to just type in the chat of Zoom, and I will transfer over to a sticky note on the Miro board. So you have that as an option.
see if I just shared you a link of how to do the music. It's only the person who's sharing the screen that can share music.
Oh,
I can't do it from my computer. Yeah.
Where did you send that to me?
Just a Telegram. Yeah.
Okay.
When you click the top bar, I think there was an advanced sharing option up in the top bar. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Yeah, advanced. The little, yep, advanced sharing options. I think there's a sound one somewhere. Oh no, it's not in there.
I definitely want to know how to do this because this would be helpful on a lot of calls. Shares. Program. Desktop equals to share. I think I have to do it before I share. No. I didn't have that option.
Okay, well, let's do some couple of things in parallel here. So while Seva's doing that, let's have a look. We're getting some good stuff that people are contributing here. Yeah, feel free to, if you've written a post-it note, unmute yourself and you can share it, expand on it a little bit more. We'd love to hear from some people, some of the ideas you've written. Anyone can go. Leanne, you look like you're writing a thesis there, a big one. Yeah.
Okay, I'll go. I was wondering if, you know, just from that short description that Joe gave, whether there's a way to get it sounded like maybe the community, I know you said 40 members, but maybe the community and the people who vote for the mayor or his constituency are not involved enough in this institution, and maybe there's a way to get them to, you know, vehemently support it through benefits that they get by being a member. Like, I don't know what they might be. I've listed some here of, you know, spins, externalities, things that this biopark might be able to offer that only members have access to. And membership would be free anyway, but they would just, or you could put in an amount, but it would basically be whatever they could afford to join. So to encourage everyone to join, and then they could attend, you know, maybe they could attend theater events or conferences or get e-cards to send to their friends or this and that. And maybe it would, I don't know, is that an idea?
It sounds good. Joe's probably got a better sense of how that lands from his local understanding.
Yeah, Leanne, this is making me think of one of the projects we're about to start. And in the list of projects that we're going through today, one of them is a Youth Independent Media Center. So I don't know if we'll get to that project today or not, but just as a more concrete element of that larger idea of creating a youth media center is to create something like a high school student paper, except more like a community paper, where once a month we have a journalistic team that does multimedia work, and part of it is to report or to tell stories about what's happening in the bioparking. Because right now, there's no communication about what's happening. No one in the town knows what's happening. So it's sort of impressive how little communication is happening, which means something like a physical piece of paper or newspaper, you could walk around to the shops and leave stacks of them on people's counters for people to pick up, would actually make a big difference here. So I think that what you're talking about makes a lot of sense. And to begin with, simply starting to communicate about what's going on and then convening dialogues would really begin to create some of the space where what you're talking about could come into being.
And I'm also wondering, what do the people need in Barichara? Like, what is the number one thing? It sounds like TVs is one thing they would love to have, but is there something else that they want? And I'm sure there's lots of community events or engagement or learning or growing trees or having seeds or, from their demand side.
Well, I can say just for everyone's benefit that the number one issue that unites people here is water. Because all of the rivers are dead and dried up. Water scarcity is a huge issue. After decades of deforestation, the erosion is terrible and accelerating because it's clay-filled soils. So erosion without the topsoil just creates channels of erosion really quickly. So the scarcity of water and the mismanagement of water, which actually the worst mismanagement of water is done by the mayor's office. But water is potentially a powerful unifying theme.
All right, so if anyone else has any other projects they'd like to share in connections, please do so now. Otherwise, let's start moving over to needs. How can we really think about these? I think maybe honing in on, say, there's kind of a handful of core needs. Do we want to review those again? So one is obviously the financial piece. There's the economic model that needs to be used to be able to fund the work already happening and maintain, but I think also then expand and increase the amount of regeneration happening there. Then there's the need of coming back to the map.
I can read those needs out. I've got them here. Right.
Excellent. The coordinator, a community coordinator. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so there's a need for a community coordinator who can manage the relationships with area schools and develop education programs. So how might we solve for that? What's the bottleneck behind that, Joe? Is it actually having a salary to pay someone to do that role? Right.
I think it's partly having a salary and at least some exploration of financial sustainability. So if we had the money to pay for the position for 6 months with a way of cultivating a business model for it during that 6 months, I think we need both. And also I think that some convening of area actors who could form an alliance around creating an education program in the bioparking. So when we talk about there's the Community Education Fund, which is another one of the projects that's listed, focused on children and families, but it also includes a lot of alternative education projects in the area. So I could see there being a convening of those offering education who then envision together what they would want, and then to imagine the coordinator being part of that, and then finding the money to prototype it and building a revenue model for it during that time.
I'm just thinking in terms of like maybe some smart ways of using resources. Could it be an offer to an existing teacher who has a salary as a teacher and then compensate for a smaller number of hours per week for that person to do an addition? maybe it's another 5 hours a week or whatever's necessary to do community coordinating.
Yeah, good question.
All right, let's capture that one.
Yeah. If we could all anchor into this question of how do we overcome these needs? How do we what are the models, any other models similar to this? This relationship between educators, schools, and the land that you have found successful, and what are those models? And I think, like, if anyone has insight there, share that insight, share the model that might be applicable here. Trying to think, like, what came to mind for me was there's like Diogo, which I think is active in Earth Regenerators. He's been hired by a school to actually do a class teaching agroforestry to the high schoolers, and I'm wondering if there can actually be that direct relationship with a local school, and that piece. But what is the current relationship between the school and this project right now? You said it's basically March is when they actually even had the ability to even send students there, so maybe it might be a stretch to actually turn it into a class at this point. But yeah.
I also talked with some of you know Dijmo, who does work on a citizen science mobile app that can create micro measurements of carbon sequestration by taking photos of plants as they're growing, sort of a blend of a citizen science, creating a database of a forest ecosystem, and then also doing calculations of things like embodied carbon, other things they have in the back end. And so I was thinking of when Ross Evans was here, who's a member of Earth Regenerators, was here a few months ago, and started creating, using an open science mapping tool, walking around the biopark and taking pictures and mapping the locations of different kinds of trees, that mobile app is now available for the students, but there isn't a teacher who is trained in knowing how to use or maintain or improve it. So it seems that having a training for the teachers to be able to have their students use a citizen science model like that could be quite powerful. So that's something I'm talking with Dijmo about, but I think it would be of general interest to explore how drones, how mobile apps, how citizen science tools, how database management tools could be used pedagogically by the local teachers.
I just got the opportunity to meet Gmo in person before we headed off on our flight to Colombia. We stopped in Florida and was able to have a layover close by to him, and we were able to chat. So we've been discussing this a lot, and he was really hoping to be able to make it to ReFi Barichara, but it doesn't look like his passport's going to allow that. He has an issue with that, and it won't be able to, unfortunately. But yeah, I think you're exactly right there. I think there's a huge opportunity in terms of and this is what we'll really, with the impact app and the groups that we're associated with, what we'll really be focused in on is, can we pilot a structure where we use a mobile phone to capture images and data of this work that's being done, and connect that to the creation of ecological assets and other carbon markets. I think there's a huge opportunity there, and we'll be progressing that. But coming back to that education piece, so the friction point of how people engage with that, do you see it as something, is it possible to have that education in the form of, say, videos and content that exists on an app itself, that can or do you need that person-to-person touch to kind of explain how, like, say what image to take, how to, what is it that we're trying to measure and account for on the ground? How do you see that education and that training looking? What does that actually look like? And do you see it as a huge friction point?
I actually want to ask Day if she would like to share from what she's been writing. And Day, just so you know, Diego is a good friend of ours too, and we helped fund his project through the Earth Regenerators Fund earlier this year. So we have a lot of close connections that we can build upon. But Day, I was just curious if you would like to share some of your thoughts about what you're hearing.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys can hear me. It's kind of loud in here. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, we can hear you.
So yeah, I'm actually gonna be visiting the school in Brazil. I'm trying to see if I can make it in November because Diego and I have been talking about creating an event for the school, and I'm trying to see if I can make it. But if not, we're working on potentially on another event, maybe in January or February. And I'm gonna be in Barichara. So I think there's a nice ways to connect, maybe like what's happening in there and what's happening in Barichara. So I don't know, just wanted to throw that out there. And I also speak Spanish. I'm Colombian, so I know all the corruption and all the difficulties with communicating with governments and administration and people in positions of power in Colombia. But yeah, I'd be happy to, I don't know, provide my support in that area to help bridge something there. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, Day, we have a Colombian friend who's in Barichara but won't be here during ReFi Barichara. His name's Jose Barco. And his wife is from England and he lived in London for a while. Has a nonprofit based in London called Community Collab. And they do really phenomenal community organizing work. And actually in the list of projects, there's one on cultivating community leaders and community organizing, and that's Jose's project. And so while you're here, we'll want to be sure you have the opportunity to meet with people like him who have a lot of experience in how we can convene meetings and dialogues and engage in community design processes. And then also with Fundación Ojo de Agua, which is a children's education project, Emilce and Oscar, they've done some phenomenal territorial scale dialogues, convening people around cross-cutting themes and, you know, with primarily with campesino families from the countryside. So we actually have a lot to build upon that when you get here, you can learn about and weave it all together.
So we'll start wrapping this one up. Maybe we can spend just a short, brief time on this last section. If there's just any other factors that we should be cognizant of or consider in how we might progress this project forward, jot them down in this last category, and then we'll move on to the next one. This first one definitely took a little bit of time, which I kind of figured we're kind of getting warmed up and just settled into this and spending the time to share our thoughts, which is great. But we can move on to the next one.
I think we're probably at a good point where we can just go ahead and move on to the next one, because we've been discussing the topics that were written down. Perfect. As we've gone, if that feels okay to everyone.
I think so.
Yeah, let's do that because we just spend 50 minutes on the first one, or with the intro and then that. So yeah, let's pick up the pace a bit.
So which one we do? We want to move up to the Youth Independent Media Center?
Yeah, let's move to that one because this is actually an idea rather than an existing project. This is one of those moments of potentials between existing projects. So I think this is a good one where we can actually imagine things. But actually, you know what I'm thinking, Seth, is it might be better. Let's do I Have Water first and then come back to it, because after we do I Have Water, we'll have more context in which to think about this one, because I actually see it as being something that would grow out of their work. So this project, Fundación Ojo de Agua, is a project led by two local people named Emilce and Oscar. Oscar was born and raised in Barichara, and his wife Emilce is from Boyacá, which is closer to Bogota. And they've been working in the region for a very long time. I'd say at least 10 years that they've been developing education programs with children to cultivate nature connection, to work on trauma healing, construction of peace, because there was a really extensive and severe 30-year period of violence here that happened roughly between the 1960s and 1990s. And so the older generation here lived through killing each other's brothers on the footpaths between the villages. So there's this very important need to reconstruct the peace and continue to do so. And so they've done things like they create theater programs and documentaries, and they teach children how to conduct interviews and how to do photography. And now they have a group of teenagers that are creating documentaries. And as an example of the power of their work, last year, as a high school, a group of 15-year-olds in high school started a project where they were asked, why did the water go away? And it turns out the water went away during the time when the neighbors were all killing each other. So they asked the question, well, we have a time of peace now. Where did the peace come from? And then they went and started asking their grandfathers and grandmothers. And they ended up creating a documentary called Paz Anónima, the Anonymous Peace, because their grandparents quietly, without any outside help, reconstructed and created peace after 30 years of violence. And so they created this powerful, transformative documentary. It was as they were doing the interviews and the school year ended, during the summer, they just kept going. And they created this incredible documentary. And so one thing that they're doing now is they've nearly finished construction of a community theater using a handmade sort of bioconstruction, a kind of wood and mud housing construction that's traditional to this region. And actually, after we're done with the Mapathon, we're taking our daughter to a theater production there. And so they do a lot of work at the blend of the arts and storytelling and interviewing and photography, theater, documentaries, led by children between the ages of 5 and 17. And they cultivate conscience and nature connection through this work. And so they call themselves the Eye of Water, Ojo de Agua, because when you look through the eyes of water, you can see the pathway to peace. You can see the movement and connection of life across the territory. And so what I think is really amazing about their work is that they have very strong connections with the rural schools and with the teachers. And one of their bigger weaknesses, if I was to call it that, I actually think it's part of their secret strength, is that they have not focused on forming relationships to the outside world, except to things like the Ministry of Culture. And like Emilce herself has been an artist in residence in at least 6 different Latin American countries. I would call her a national treasure of Colombia. She's truly a phenomenal human being. So they have a lot of connections to institutions and theater performers and dancers all over Latin America, which is a real strength. But one of their weaknesses, I would say, is they have a history of being skeptical or wary of collaborating with outsiders because of fear of colonial influences, which means it's been a slow process to build trust where they would collaborate with the outside world on the terms of the local people. And that's because they care so much about protecting the local campesino culture of Santander, of this region. And so they have this sort of double-edged sword, really deep relationships into the community, great collaboration with primarily 3 schools. I mean, they work with others, but 3 schools in different rural zones where the teachers are building education programs across multiple years, working with the parents and the community leaders. They have children that are guardians of well springs of water, or what they call in Colombia, nacimientos del agua, the birthplaces of water. And they're really good at building consciousness and stewardship, ecological restoration work. And I think that one of their biggest opportunities is to spread to other rural schools. Currently, they're primarily working with 3 of the, in Colombia, a rural zone is called a vereda. And so there are 18 veredas in our region, and they're working with 3 of them. But to replicate what they're doing in the other rural schools would be absolutely transformative. To form sustained relationships with the bioparque, with the work, with other work that's happening in the territory would really be a breakthrough for what they're doing. It's like they're so good at what they do, but they aren't really replicating it well because they're so focused on what they do. And so maybe I'll let that be the introduction, and then we can start some discussion or clarifying questions. And I see Evan has his hand up. So hi, Evan. Nice to meet you.
First things first, my name's Evan. Thanks for having me. I'm sorry I'm a little late. I'm at home visiting my family. I'll talk more about my project later. My only question is, it sounds like you've identified a way that their organization can grow, but have you talked to them about that? Have they expressed a desire to expand outwards? Or you mentioned that they have some pretty well justified, I don't know, skepticism, or they're leery of outside influence, right? So is that something that they're comfortable with and interested in that we can help them with, or would we be imposing this on them from outside?
I think we're just getting to the point where if we gently offer, they would be open to exploring dialogue. Because 2 years ago, when I invited people to join an advisory council to create the Barichara Regeneration Fund, we invited Emil Sandosky, and they initially came. And then they decided that it was just a gringo from the north bringing money and might be another colonizer. You know, legitimate concern, turned out not to be the case. And so they stepped away from participating. But what's happened since then is we're now more than a year into creating a territorial foundation. And we engaged Emilce in participating in the design of the governance for this territorial foundation, starting in June of this year. And now we're weaving relationships because they've been holding, as I was saying today a few minutes ago, they've been holding territorial dialogues that are really powerful for the last several months, which is exactly what we'd need to create a territorial foundation. So we're just in the place where we're creating mutual exchange. And it happens that a member of the pledge community for the Barichara Ecoversity, who wants to remain anonymous for now, is making a $10,000 donation to complete the construction of their theater. And so they're starting to see that on their terms, they're able to invite support from the outside. And we're actually maintaining that healthy balance and equality up to now. So I would say the door has just opened and we're in a good moment to begin exploring.
Thank you so much. This sounds just amazingly beautiful. And can I just say, I'm really grateful that I stumbled into this gathering of people and projects. Thank you very much.
No, I'm glad you're here, Evans. Are there any other questions about Ojo de Agua that people have, or comments that you have? If not, we can definitely jump to the Miro board unless you guys are already ahead of me. I haven't gone over there yet.
Yep, let's go over to the Miro board. So this is here.
Yeah, it's about halfway down that section.
Duplicate one. Origin
The Eye of Water?
del
No.
Agua. No, these are two different ones. Origin del Agua and Ojo de Agua. Okay. These are different. Excellent.
I put it in the wrong room.
And just in case anyone it's unclear where where this one is, it's right here. I'll take you all to me. There we go.
Yeah, one of the things I was just thinking, I'll put Urbanica there. They're in Mexico and they're doing storytelling in Unreal 5 engine and another metaverse as well about different cultural constructs. So that's a way, I don't know how much they would want to replicate and export what they're doing, but that could also be, it could be a source of income potentially. But yeah, spreading it beyond the borders, these kind of stories I think are beautiful to have other cultures imbibing.
Joe, you're muted.
Oh, sorry, was there a question for me? I was talking to someone else in the room. Sorry, I got distracted for a moment.
You're all good. And everyone, feel free, if you can spend time looking at thinking about connections to other projects, but if you don't have any ideas there, feel free to move on to the other sections right away and look at the can we address the needs of this project or factors, other considerations that we might consider. Feel free to start adding as well. Bless you.
Oh, sorry. I just didn't realize I was unmuted.
All good. Joe, coming back to the needs of this project, so there's this initial kind of funding to build a theater, and so there's some funding coming through, which is amazing. How would you kind of synthesize the needs of this project? You kind of mentioned I think most of these will have some sort of like funding element and associated with them, but around the duplication, would it be make a lot of sense to think more deeply around this duplication and how they can be connected to other projects? Is that really where you see the need?
Yeah, in the there's another project that's on the list about creating a community fund for education of children and families. And that the word community fund has a specific meaning in relationship to community foundations. So we're creating a territorial foundation, which is a model of community foundation, but organized around the geography of a territory. And a community fund is actually the convening of an alliance of actors, a multi-actor alliance around a holistic theme. So if we had a holistic theme of regenerative education for children, then there would be an alliance of actors who would convene around that theme. And what I see as needed for Fundación Ojo de Agua is for there to be a convening where one of the things that happens is Emilce and Oscar just share what they've been doing and share how they understand their needs. And then there's a sort of almost like an opportunity mapping or a collective visioning process. What can we do with what we already have? That includes other existing educational offerings. And then from that place, I suspect a lot of solidarity exchanges would be able to arise. Or in Colombia, what they call these things mingas. Minga is like the Colombian version of a barn raising, where a bunch of neighbors come together and build something. And I could see them doing a type of mingas, a type of community exchanges, where they actually wouldn't need money to do a lot of the things they need to do. There might be specific things they need funding for, like to create equipment or to hire someone to standardize pedagogy or something like that. But in general, I think that convening people and finding the points of synergy would reveal a natural and organic exchange between them without needing additional money.
All right. And again, if there's any other additional factors, throw them in at the end. We'll wrap this one up in the next 30 seconds to a minute. So you can finish up your thoughts, and I think we'll move on to the next one. Does that sound all right to everyone? Okay. All right, doesn't look like anyone else is adding at the moment. Let's move on to the next. And you said you wanted to then move to the youth independent media center. Is that correct?
Yeah, let's do the youth independent media system, and then after that, maybe we go on to the local market and community house. So the Youth Independent Media Center really started when there was a young man named Guillermo, who is here in Barichara, who works in audiovisual production for like TV soap operas and for movies with some of the film industry that's in Bogota. And as he was doing a work exchange to create small, like 5-minute video segments of stories that were happening around the regeneration of the territory, he kept articulating this desire to create a youth independent media center. And as we talked about it, we could feel the sense that if we were just able to provide a little bit of equipment, a couple of good cameras, maybe a good laptop, maybe 2 laptops with software on them, so that a group of high schoolers connected with a school teacher could actually start to organize media production. Because right now there's already at least one school teacher that works with Fundación Ojo de Agua. So they partner with Emilce and Oscar that does some of this work teaching interview techniques and film editing and photography, but the kids don't have enough equipment to do the work themselves. So they're limited by using the equipment that Oscar has. But if we provided a space where they could gather together and they had the equipment that they needed, it would actually start to create a dynamic of going from doing projects as part of their classes at school to actually doing projects that they wanted to, whether or not they're part of the school. Where it could just grow to a little bit higher level. And so what I sense for creating the Youth Independent Media Center, part of it is that, as we'll see in the next project after this one around creating a mercado local, a local market, which is seeking to transform the local food system, which has a lot of activity already going on and already has a community space set aside, because I had raised $18,000 at the beginning of the year to begin enabling a group to create a local market. And that's been going since February. But they're actually far enough along in integrating work that has several years of history prior to that catalyzing energy that started this year. That we're in a place that simply bringing together the resources to find the electronics equipment or the computer equipment that would be needed. So think of like a good podcast microphone, a good laptop computer that could be a used laptop computer. You're already starting to see these are things that people coming to ReFi Barichara might bring with them in their suitcase. Someone might have extra equipment or might donate it. And so I think one of the ideas here is for us to identify what would be sort of an optimal first set of equipment that we try to crowdsource and bring together. And then the next level up would be to find a person who can actually be the coordinator. We thought Guillermo would be the person, but then he ended up getting an opportunity to go work in Spain, and he left Colombia for the next year. So we no longer have a passionate young Colombian capable of leading the project. And so another thing that I would want to do would be to reach out into our networks in Colombia to try to identify someone from the film industry or from related domains, because Colombia's got a pretty strong film industry, to find someone that would want to come and lead this work. And then find a way to financially support them or do a work exchange for them to have housing and food. And so I see this as an opportunity to transform a lot of what's happening, because one of our biggest problems at the moment is we're doing incredibly complex work, and the only real storytelling being done is my weekly Barichara updates in English to people outside of Barichara. there's not really a set of mechanisms for communicating within Barichara, which is where the idea I named earlier about creating like a monthly newsletter, like a physical newspaper. And actually, I would recommend a physical version and a multimedia version. Like there might be a website, there might be a YouTube channel, there might be a Facebook page. There'd probably be a WhatsApp group because WhatsApp is the communication tool of choice in Latin America. But I would actually recommend a physical print medium that would be given out to the local shops because of the way the culture works here in the community. We do have really good graphic designers in town. We have people with drones who know how to use them. We do have at least one person who used to work with video games in New York and Seattle, who's from Colombia and lives here. And he and his wife are really interested in reforestation. So we have like amazing local talent because Colombia has that talent, and Barichara is sort of a nexus of rich, well-educated Colombians. So we can access some of those pathways to create this. And what I actually think we need to do is bootstrap it, is what I would say, is articulate it into being with a set of equipment and a good vision, and then try and identify who the school teacher would be that would work with the youth, and then figure out what kind of support they would need in terms of personnel and resources. But I see this as an emergent opportunity that would absolutely be a game changer, because we're right on the cusp of creating a circulation of learning across all the projects. And that's exactly what this media center could do. So I'll let that stand for now and say, are there any questions or comments?
I might just ask a quick question in terms of networks and reaching out to find people in the film industry around exactly what kind of, I guess, profile you're looking for, just so I can start asking.
Do we lose Joe?
I think Joe's frozen up.
Yeah, frozen up. I'm not entirely sure. But this is really relevant. I mean, when especially it makes sense why you shared the first one too, because when I was thinking about how we might address the sharing of the theater productions and what's happening with which one was that? Eye of Water. Doing videos and just like sharing small short documentaries, or just video of the productions themselves, or anything like that, is something that came to mind. So having the space to do that and the center to that makes a lot of sense. But trying to think about how this connects to other potential projects or ways we might support this more globally, and struggling to come up with anything myself. This one is going to be Youth Independent Media Center, about midway down.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's anybody, a person who's already got some skills in media might want to come and do a stint for a month or so there, and then help, tutor this youth or help, get this established. That could be like a really interesting pairing if someone wanted to come out and do something like that.
Well, if the kids spoke, I'm not bilingual, I could support something like that, but unfortunately my Spanish is very poor. I think it sounds like we need someone who's pretty fluent with bilingual. It's something I could help support while I'm out there for the 2 months after ReFi Barichara.
Have you done work
I'm on my phone and just stepping away. Sorry about that.
Okay. Stephen, have you got experience with media and film, do you?
Yes, I do live event production primarily now, but I've been shooting and editing. I'm not a full-time pro in the field, but many years ago, I did teach a bunch of kids some basic filmmaking stuff. and I've worked on film projects and such. So, if I had someone to partner with who maybe is, younger and bilingual and has some film experience, we could probably do a really good, powerful partnership together to support that.
Do you hear all of that, Joe?
Yeah, I heard that. I think I have some connections to Colombian people who may have some of this experience. Like I could ask Guillermo, who was here, for example, if he has other friends, especially if we were just going to bring someone for a month or two to actually help set it up, but they may not need to stay here. So I think it would be very interesting to identify someone that we could bring in. Preferably it would be a Colombian, because there's a lot of local capacity. There are a lot of very well-educated Colombians. So it's a matter of just finding someone that could do it.
And I hate to admit that there are lots of young, I don't know what the deal is in Colombia, but there are lots of young YouTubers who have much better overall skills than I do, because that's what they focus on, and they're younger and more enthusiastic, and video is secondary to my live event stuff. So I can provide age and wisdom and experience in some areas, and that's where maybe an intergenerational partnership with someone who is maybe just more experienced in other areas. It could be a really good synergy there.
Yeah, and also I haven't spoken to Oscar about this, and I know he knows how to do this. I mean, he teaches it now at Ojo de Agua, but I just don't know what capacity he has. Meaning, I don't know if he's too committed in other things or if he would prioritize doing this. So I would definitely want to have a conversation with him to see if he might even be able to do it.
What comes to mind for me for this one is it maybe possible to do a competition, a bounty or a prize for like a video competition, and have even if it's just a few $100s or something, and share that to the community, to schools, and see who comes out of the woodwork and submits their work, and then tap them to after the winner of the competition, or maybe if the top few people, tap them to and encourage them to help join in, participate in the founding of this.
Yeah, and actually, I think the video and media production, one video part is less important. So we also have several really good graphic designers and visual designers here in town, and muralists as well. So we have, there's a young couple named Donnie and Juliana who they make physical puppets and do puppet theater. And Danny's a really good graphic designer and photographer. He and Juliana have done theater production with kids. They've collaborated with MLC and Oscar. It might even be that they could do it. So I actually think doing a talent search here in the community is a possibility, but without having resources to pay them for the work, I don't think we'd get very far. So I think that having a budget to start the project at least is going to be part of getting this one up and going.
What kind of budget might that look like?
Like maybe $1,000 and then the equipment.
I'm also just thinking about, what is a sustainable media business model, right? Traditional media is working with advertising, right, in order to fund media that goes out there and pairing that with people's attention to sell media. I don't know if that model might be viable or an alternative model, because ultimately I'd want something to be sustainable, that people could have a job producing media year over year. And how would we fund that?
Okay.
Yeah, I see that question as being connected to
Kind of freezing up a lot there, Roger.
Food, around local food, that could also provide a space for some
Joe, can you hear us? You're not coming in. The only
see if
thing
my
that
internet
we,
works.
No lights on your.
we
You
only
guys
got
still hear me or
local
did I-
food. Yep.
No, sorry. I went to see if my internet had come back on. I went in the house where my phone signal's weak, and the internet wasn't back on. I was saying that when we get to the discussion of the mercado local, the local market, where we're looking at how to create a solidarity food network, that includes having a community space for a community kitchen and training center, and the media center could be in the same location. So there could be some co-location of projects.
Joe, might there be an opportunity to fundraise for that $1,000 budget by putting together some sort of prototype or initial model that sort of shows more people what it is you're trying to accomplish?
Yes, and also we're approaching the $20,000 mark on our Gitcoin grant. And so as that money becomes available at the end of the Gitcoin round, we will have budget to allocate to projects like this. So it may even be that we don't need to specifically fundraise for this at the moment. But just having in mind more how to create a sustainable business model, I think is the more important thing at this point.
All right. Anything else that we want to add to this before we move on to the next?
I heard mentioning print. That scares me a little bit just from like being 2022, but a quick idea I've seen, at least in Mozambique, was some of the impact and environmental projects would buy placement in newspapers. And this was pretty efficient in getting in front of some of the more senior folks. And often it was recurring and keeping up to date on impact stories. So I was personally very interested in those. I have no idea if there's a local newspaper, but I think coming up with a whole, magazine would be a lot of work.
Yeah, just to add a comment on that, Dijmo, we don't have a local newspaper, but we do have a place called Talleres Papel, which is supported by the Ministry of Culture. And it's a place specifically for maintaining the traditional practices to create paper from native plants. Because you can make paper from pineapple, for example. And so there are local people here who they give workshops and teach people how to make natural fiber paper from materials that are grown on the farms locally. So it would be very easy to print this on like a 1 or 2 page front and back paper that is made from native plants.
Cool.
All right. Shall we move on to the next?
Let's do it.
Yes, we're ready to go to the Casa Común and community market. Is that right?
Sure. The only other one that we had at the top here was there's did we do holy water? And
No, no, we haven't done holy water, Agua Santa.
whichever
But
one next is, you have the most insight there. So please, whatever one you think.
yeah, I would say the Casa Común and the community house and the community market. And also the internet's come back on. So as I go back inside, I may lose signal for a moment, but then I'll jump back on my computer.
Sounds good.
Let's see if I can do that. Where's the link
We have the
to
local market, the Casa
the Zoom link? I hope it's up above.
So this one is an effort to transform local food systems that works with a network of 50 local campesino families who are spread throughout the rural parts of the territory. It focuses on creating solidarity exchanges and cultivate less food waste, more value-added products, and learning exchanges among the network. They are currently prototyping a community space for setting up a commercial kitchen and have several field sites for food dehydration and other kinds of processing.
Yep, and I'm back now, so I can give a bit more context on this. The network of approximately 50 families is a nonprofit called Muheri Vida, Woman in Life, which was founded in the mid-1990s. And it's a group of campesino women who work on like food security in various ways. And so this project is led by a woman named Margarita Higuera, and she's like a world-class community network weaver, just like continually weaving relationships between people. And she's been doing it for more than 6 years. And her core focus is on trauma healing. And so there's an element of this that's really important, which is that the way that they began doing this work was creating circles of women having dialogues, but then they gradually started digging into how to create viable economic models for the household, how to recover traditional knowledge about the use of native plants, how to turn local plants into highly processed or high value food items they could sell into the tourism market, and various things like this. And one of the things that's at the base of this project at the moment is that one of Margarita's houses is now a community space with a kitchen that is being treated as like the kitchen itself is like a maker space. It's a place where people go and learn how to process different kinds of food, where they take native plants, learn different ways of processing them, teach each other techniques. And then they also do workshops at the homes of different campesino farms on things like food hydration, distillation, making tinctures, making essential oils from native plants. And one of their flagship projects is a type of granola where they gather together all of the fruits that are used in it and that are dehydrated to make the granola, are waste products from people's farms that have been transformed into a really valuable input into a very well brand, like a good brand logo and packaging, well-designed granola that's delicious and nutritious. And what happens is the campesinos who bring their food waste use the dehydrators to make high processed foods, get the high processed foods back and money for their food waste. And so they've been developing a framework of solidarity exchanges to show people how they can recover traditional practices. And the reason I connected this to trauma healing in the beginning is that one of the mindsets that comes from 500 years of colonialism is the idea that if you're a farmer out in the countryside, that you're somehow poor and that you're not rich unless you're a good consumer capitalist in the city. And so undoing that mindset and restoring traditional knowledge is a major focus of trauma healing and decolonization. And so, which is why I would say this is primarily a trauma healing exercise that as a byproduct is creating a resilient regional food system because of the way that it works. And that's why there's such strong emphasis on solidarity exchanges that don't involve money. And Chad, who I believe is still here on the call. Chad, are you here? Yeah, Chad is here.
Right. Yep.
So Chad was here in Barichara for 2 months and helped Margarita with some of the preliminary mapping of this food system. So Chad, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add or if you think I'm doing a good enough job for now. Is there anything you want to put on here?
I think that's great. I just sort of underline the spirit that Margaritas bring to the exchange is one to demonetize relationships with the campesinos and to create a need for or the opportunity to circulate value without the need for current or for money. And that's something that we're talking about expanding from her niche business into the food hub at larger scales.
Yeah, they're also in the process right now and completing a renovation of part of their house to turn it into the marketplace. There was a marketplace called Mercado Nomad that was privately owned by a couple that had set up a successful business doing it. And then they decided that they just wanted to live in the countryside and run their hostel and not run the business anymore, even though they had about 20 different food producers, all of them local campesinos who had really nice value-added products. Unfortunately, when they tried to sell that business to Margarita, they botched the intellectual property so badly that it was just not worth buying it. Basically, they tried to keep ownership of everything except for the refrigerators and shelves and sell the business for the price of the business, but then keep everything for themselves. And when an honest conversation was had about how they could do it a better way, they refused to budge. So the Mercado Nomads shut down about a month ago. And Margarita's in the process of reconstructing it quickly in part of her home, where they're building up a tienda, a store. And one of the things that she had mentioned when I talked to her the other day is that it would be really powerful to create a database management system that campesinos could use that would help them track the value exchanges. So they would be able to, like right now, she has a basket in her kitchen and people come and no one's there. There's no oversight. People just come and in a little, in a little box, they put their money, they take the items they want. It's completely based in trust and it's completely working. But for them to be able to do that and build it to a larger scale, they need to have a database management system with a good user interface. So that was an element that she named that it's good timing to try and build something like that because it would be well received in this moment. And the other thing I'll give is just one example of a woman who's the current director of Mujer y Vida, but she's also part of this food network. Her name is Samara. And Samara has a 1 hectare finca that has a biodigester, a food distillery, a dehydrator, and an agroforestry system. And she's able to grow all the, produce her own electricity and use all the gas she needs to cook in her kitchen from a biodigester with like 4 pigs and a dozen chickens, the food waste they produce. And also have a successful multi-product agroforestry system connected together into this network of food processing and dehydrating and creating value-added products within the community market. So she sort of exemplifies on a 1 hectare piece of land what is happening across the territory. And a lot of what's needed is to take the pattern language of that way of thinking and get more people to understand how to do it so they can participate in these kinds of exchange. So with that, are there any questions or comments that people have?
I have one general question, and it's not necessarily this example, it just rang bells for me. You mentioned in the sort of the overview of the mapping that Seeds was present. How active is Seeds within the community at the moment, if at all?
You mean Seeds, the regenerative finance cryptocurrency?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, not at all in Barichara.
Not at all, okay, cool. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, they're a bunch of friends of mine. I've known them for years, but we are working on creating community currencies. And during the time of the pandemic, we had a spontaneously formed solidarity market between 15 fincas and about 35 families in the town, where for 5 months, a truck was driven around to 15 fincas in the same region, gathered all the food, people volunteered to sort it into bags for 35 families, and people paid the equivalent to about $5 US for a week's worth of produce. They would have paid more, but the campesinos basically refused to accept more. They said they didn't need it. And a solidarity market existed for 5 months. This was during a time when tourism completely went away and the local economy collapsed.
Wow. So coming back to the needs here, the knowledge or the database system is one. What is that? I think this might be a clear anchor is what other technologies or platforms or databases or tools could be implemented here. And what could you walk through a little bit more, like what that might look like? And is it the transactional piece, like you mentioned, the just coming up and on a trust-based system, grabbing something from the basket and paying for it? But in terms of scaling that, what actually would that look like? Because there might be some things happening in Web3 and ReFi that could help here for sure.
Yeah, I'm thinking of this place because I have history with hacker maker spaces, and also I helped create the Impact Hub in Seattle, which was a sister to the Impact Hub in San Francisco. So this gathering of social entrepreneurs and impact businesses and impact nonprofits. And I see this as an opportunity to create an impact hub of a different kind. of basically creating a startup incubator for social businesses that are at the household scale. And so one of the pieces of this is actually basic business training, like teaching people how to bring products to market, teaching them how to do branding and product design, teaching them how to manage a business. Because a lot of the people who do this work are, I mean, I wouldn't say they're uneducated campesinos. I'd say they're highly educated as campesinos, but not necessarily highly educated in business. And so the risk, of course, with business education would be indoctrinating them into the dogmas of the market. When actually a lot of what they need to do is take indigenous cultural practices embodied in things like the Minga, this, like barn raising is a North American example, which is actually an indigenous practice from Europe that later came to America with the European settlers. This indigenous practice of people gathering together and creating neighborly exchanges is a really powerful connection. And another really powerful connection, I think, is watershed restoration. As I mentioned earlier, that water is the major organizing theme of the territory. We have another project in syntropic agroforestry where we're showing people how to restore watersheds with reforestation. But because it's agroforestry, there's also economic productivity. And so this blending of economic productivity with landscape restoration or ecological restoration seems to be key. And when we start going into some of the work, more like what Seb and Sam do with defining ecological assets, I think something like creating a water token or a water-based community currency or a soil-based community currency or some kind of trust exchange community currency between value inputs into value-added products could be mapped from some of what's already happening here. So I see some of this like ecological asset definition, tracking, and value flows would be a really powerful place to prototype. And also just the identifying and the naming of how the various commons work, because they're clearly present, but they're not very well understood. As someone who works with the commons, I see all the time that people don't get what a commons is. So I think a lot of opportunity here is with pedagogical tools and business design that are focused toward regenerative economic practices.
So I'm gonna, okay, I have a little quick private chat with Shane because I'm wondering how REA accounting might work in this environment, and that's a whole big world. So I don't know if Shane, you can speak to something about what you know about the project you're working on and a resource event. I don't remember what the A stands for, but just mention how that tool could be used in what Joe is describing.
Yeah, totally. So the A is agent, so resource event agent. And so at least this part, at this point, the REA play space that I'm working on could be useful for modeling what the flows of resources from these individual businesses and households might look like. And maybe kind of like in a rough way of saying, kind of like running simulations at this point, just modeling it. It's like, hey, what can this look like? Yeah, and also at least with the REA play space, I imagine there's going to be some limitations in its functionality. And so I'd be really curious to see what kind of things actually want to be modeled, what kind of interactions, what kind of agents, what are the roles each organization or person would be taking, so we can have make more complete models and more accurate models of these kinds of circular economies. Yeah, what spoke to me was when, Joe, you were talking about wanting to get the campesinos involved in this exchange and teach them business, but not teach them extractive capitalism. And I just see, from what little I understand of REA, that this is a great opportunity for them, because I suspect people closer to the land like that might see value flows, although they don't have the language and the distinctions that us high, big-brained intellectual Northerners have in terms of flows of value, especially in resources at a more agricultural level. And it just seems like this would be a perfect tool for a synergy of them looking for what they need and us being able to provide it
and shape the design of this tool and future REA systems.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful to think with, especially when we look at some of the, like there are B Corps in Colombia. And so that model has been here now for a couple of years. And we actually have a B Corp here in Barichara. That'll be part of the net. When we talk about Agua Santa, holy water, they created Cafe Humano as a cooperative and then later as a B Corp. And so that movement is present in Colombia. And what's interesting is to connect it with food forests. And there is a food forest movement as well that is spreading across Colombia based in agroecology or indigenous agroforestry systems. So I think there's a really powerful opportunity to connect some of these themes, especially with learning exchanges between territories in Colombia, because the cultural diversity is just astonishing. How many indigenous cultures are still intact in Colombia for these kinds of learning exchanges to occur.
A quick question, Joe, did you mention there was like a community kitchen in this place as well, in the common house?
Yeah, there is. It's been running as Margarita's Kitchen for several years. But what we've been doing this year is turning Margarita's House into a fully expressed community space. And it's been functioning as a community space since February. So they already have a kitchen, but they don't have, well, they actually do have like several ovens and refrigerators, and so they do have some commercial kitchen capacity. I think that they would need to expand a bit to be a commercial kitchen that could function for, say, incubating businesses around 15 or 20 or 30 different farms, and maybe 30, 40, or 50 different integrated food products that are integrated in the sense that they have inputs from more than one farm. And so at this point, there are maybe 15 or 20, what I would call those integrated products that different campesino farmers are collaborating to create. But I think we're right on the cusp of it growing to quite a bit more. And a commercial kitchen would, the kitchen they have now has been good enough up till present, but won't be good enough for what is coming.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, if capacity increases and there's like predictable like needs to serving an audience, or if that's like integrated into any of the local programs, maybe this could lend itself to microloans to farmers that are paid in kind by the food products. I have some experience with this in Malawi, but it seems like this is a pretty small scale, but nonetheless, upfront, before season starts, usually farmers can really benefit from loans. So I'm not sure if there's any financial bottlenecks to the farmers, but just a quick thought.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to think about further. At this point, I see the place I see loans being most important is to help people set up agroforestry systems on degraded land where they may not be economically viable for 5 to 8 years. Like if someone's going to do avocado, for example, you need about 5 years. Cacao is 5 to 8 years. So you could have other products prior to those, fruit and nut trees, but to be able to build agroforestry systems with watershed restoration. I'm seeing more at that scale, but because in the areas where there's already a lot of agroforestry, they're established. Some of these farms are 30 or 40, 50 years old. So they've been at it for a while and have a lot of capacity. I think it's more in the heavily degraded areas where there's open space to do reforestation, but there's not a viable financial supports and economic model for making the transition from a couple of cows or pigs to full-on agroforestry where there might be multi-year delays before the financial returns are sustainable.
Yeah, that makes sense. It would be super interesting to see how long-term investments or loans could be paid back in shorter term, like available food commodities, sort of still in kind, but a different commodity altogether. Something obviously that has to be beneficial to the farmer as well. Cheers.
Yeah. I'd love to riff on that further at some point.
So looping a lot of these projects together, I'm starting to think about this idea of like storytelling through food. And when it comes to kind of educating the local Barichara community about all of these projects and what's happening, hosting dinners with the produce that comes from some of these other regenerative farms and agroforests and tropic agroforest, food forests, etc., at this hub, at this local kitchen, um, and maybe having some video or recording of that, or people love watching videos of food being made. So I wonder if there's some element of kind of weaving a lot of these other projects all together with that anchor of food as the format.
Sav, it's funny you mentioned that because during the pandemic, I was lending my Crowdcast account to Margarita to do workshops called Transformaciones Alimentarias. So basically transforming food. And so anyone who would like to see them, I've got maybe 8 different Spanish language food transformation videos, which are kind of like the Food Network videos of people in Barichara. And they would do things like, here is the breadfruit. Here are our chefs from 6 of our best restaurants, each of them, because we have great restaurants in Barichara for all the tourists. They would just say, here's this recipe I made with breadfruit. Here's this recipe I made with breadfruit. By the way, you can grow breadfruit on your farm. And so we were doing that back in 2020. And that could be an interesting thing to revive as part of the Independent Media Center. I hadn't thought of that until just now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, so Joe, you were talking about the Cosechas de Confianza effort that took place during the pandemic, where they went and brought food from the campesinos back into town and created a new exchange network when the supply chains were freezing up. And so I gather that one of the things that people liked most about that was the opportunity to get together. So in addition to distributing food and ensuring economic flows, it was a social opportunity for social gathering. And I think there was the thirst to revive something like that. And I think also part of that, it's maybe what you're referring to, was people were getting food that maybe they didn't know how to prepare themselves. So there was also an opportunity to share cooking practices and best techniques, and reconnect with the cultural landscape in that way.
Yes, yes, and yes. It was exactly like that. And the food is just like, you got this, big sack with a big pile of food, and you're like, what do I do with all that corn? Oh my gosh, look at all those beans. It was sort of incredible in the way that it stimulated exchanges between families. Like people would share their produce with each other, say, I don't want as many of these because my kids don't like them. And so a lot of that was happening, mainly because everyone was locked up in their houses during a military lockdown. And they were sneaking to each other's houses to have parties and get-togethers. Because during the first 6 months of the pandemic, it was like we had military patrols where they wouldn't allow you out of the house. Even though we had 0 cases of COVID until 4 months after tourism opened up again. We're way out in the mountains here, so the urban plagues didn't really have much effect on us once they stopped tourism. But yeah, I think it's really interesting. I wonder, for the sake of time for where we're at for Klaus and Sav, if it might be a good time to move on to Agua Santa and explore it, because it naturally flows from what we're talking about now.
Absolutely.
Not as a pun, or maybe as a pun.
So this one is...
Yeah, holy water. It's down low in the list. Yeah, or it's up there. Yeah, that's the one. So this one, Agua Santa, it's operating at 2 levels. And Terra Innova is a local nonprofit that manages the larger level, and Agua Santa is a single farm. So Agua Santa is a 14-hectare farm that does regenerative agroforestry, watershed restoration, and is a community learning space for regenerative agroforestry and organic farming techniques, for biochar composting and soil building, and for watershed restoration. Whereas Terra Innova is an organization that represents 14 different regenerative agriculture farms that engage in various kinds of technical exchanges so that they can learn together and bring things to market. And when we had those farms that did the Solidarity Food Network in 2020 during the pandemic, it was the network of Terra Innova that did that. They were already pre-organized. And just to briefly tell the story, Terra Innova formed when a Dutch company came into Colombia tried to buy a piece of land right at the top of a watershed where all the water went to the agricultural area of the territory so that they could grow and sell recreational marijuana. And then all the campesinos organized to protect their water because all the water of food production for the region was going to be destroyed so that Scandinavians could get stoned. And so they organized and stopped it. And when they stopped it, they found a way to raise the money to buy the land instead. And it was the source of their water. And that's how Terra Innova was born. The landowners of 14 farms in an agricultural center organized to stop an outside multinational business that was going to steal their water. And that happened partly because this region in Colombia 50 years ago had the highest concentration of cooperatives anywhere on earth. That isn't the case anymore, but there's a history of people collaborating really well in this region. And so what these projects represent is a hub in Agua Santa, which is a place where they're actually restoring an entire tributary of a river. And they're connecting across neighbors through learning exchanges for 14 farms. And they are in the agricultural center of the territory, where they have the best soils and the best rains. And these are people who have a lot of capacity for agroforestry. These are families that are more than one generation for each farm, at least 2 generations old, primarily connected through shade-grown coffee, and then all of the other agricultural products they can produce in those systems. Hold on, sweetie, I'm explaining something. And what's really key about this is that Agua Santa, which is led by an absolutely amazing social entrepreneur named Carlos Gomez, who actually studied theater in college and then went on to teach himself biochemistry and everything else he needs to know to do a regenerative agriculture expert. These are like systems entrepreneurs. They turned this network into a cooperative and then later turned it into a B Corp. And they have everything they need to create like a regenerative agroforestry and permaculture learning center on Agua Santa. And they're actually doing a lot of educational activities, but only within the local network of their neighbors. And so I think there's a real opportunity to make coherent and visible that people from all over the country, certainly people all over the territory, but even people all over the country, could come to Agua Santa as something more like a permaculture center. So I'd say something like a permaculture center, because it's really a regenerative agroforestry food network center, more than permaculture specifically. But I wanted to name this place as having all of the strengths of the neighbors, their knowledge, their history, their organization, their savvy with institutions and institutional innovation. They bring food to the market. And when there was a study done back in 2019, they found that more than 70% of the food that's consumed in Barichara is grown within 10 kilometers of the town. So you think of like food mapping of resilience, most places have less than 7%. Here we have more than 70%. So we could actually move toward 100% food security, which almost no place on earth can say. And we would grow that from Terra Innova and Agua Santa. They are the core of that organizational capacity and knowledge. So I see them as being representative of something really profound. And their biggest needs so far seem to be that they need to be able to replicate what they're doing into other parts of the territory. And they need to build and sustain educational processes, educational offerings that can sustain the replication of what they have to share. And I don't know that they need money so much as they need students. They need they need a flow of people coming to them for support that would justify building and maintaining the programs that they already have incubated, but they don't do in a sustained manner. And I think that's probably the primary thing for them. There's more in the details, but for now, I'll stop there and ask if there are any questions.
The first thing that comes to my mind is I know that there's a lot of interest in these techniques and this type of system in the global north. And so I wonder if there's any potential for sustained connections between similar educational institutions or permaculture initiatives in, for example, the United States, some kind of exchange program or something like that. If you're talking about flows of students and knowledge and talents and skills, and then that would go both ways, right? They would take back to their bioregions the skills that they learned, and it would enrich both parties.
I think that something like the University Agriculture Extension Network in the United States, which is actually, as you probably know, living in Iowa, is actually very strong and very important. I grew up in Missouri on an industrial chicken farm that I escaped, but I know about the ag extension. And it's pretty phenomenal. And I was talking with Will, I forget his last name, from Horseshoe Capital in Texas, who's part of a collaboration to try and bring these kinds of practices to the Ogallala aquifer, which covers like a third of the United States. I see this kind of potential, especially through ag extensions or sustainability exchanges, where students from universities in the United States go to do foreign exchanges, like out of country experiences. I think some kind of a learning exchange would be very powerful in this case. And with, thanks, Jimo, for that connection to Will. And while Carlos Gomez doesn't speak English, his wife Maritza is a professional translator and does speak English. So they do have capacity to be a bilingual team in teaching. But I think we could do a lot more to actually take their techniques and turn them into training materials if there was funding to create those learning exchanges. So if there are opportunities in the breadbasket of North America to build some of those relationships, starting on a small scale to prototype, but I think it could sustain a lot of learning exchanges.
Just on that, like coming back again to the seeds community, there's a whole group there. I don't know if they're called permatours or this regen living, but it looks like they've basically enabled the setting up of similar sort of facilities, if you like, where they become educational facilities for the community, but they're effectively functioning as their own as a farm. And they get funding from within the seeds community to take that to the next level on the grounds that they continue to educate and bring people through. But the thing is, it immediately connects you then with all of the other groups globally that are doing the same thing. I know some of them are in America, but I think they've got some in Kenya that are doing it. They've got them sort of peppered all over the place, Costa Rica. So that might be a handy network to maybe draw insights from.
Yeah, I think exactly that kind of organizing is what we need to do. What I've seen in my experience, especially during the 10 months when I lived in Costa Rica and traveled around a lot, was that there are a lot of great projects, but there really was very little capacity to move to the territorial scale. In each region, there were different reasons for it. It just was challenging. And here where we are, there's already a lot of it that already was nascently happening. And so I think that what I think is really powerful about this region is the way that we are creating this territorial patterning, which is why that's going to be a major theme of ReFi Barichara is how do we look at the territorial patterning of what's already here? How is it weaving itself together? And how can we help weave it together? And how can that be learned for other places? And I think exactly what you're talking about, Kate, will help with that, not only to bring what's in Barichara to other places, but to bring all of these places to each other in peer-to-peer networks.
Yeah, I want to jump in on this piece, and then I've got to drop off. One thing that's occurring to me, we're going through project by project, and beyond like looking at making contribution at a project level, I'm wondering if there's something we can learn from in the structure within the crypto communities and DAOs, where you have an entity that has a treasury, and they usually have a grants program. And they have certain bounties to allocate and incubate various ideas. How might we mimic some kind of structure like that, where there is a pooling of funds in general, then there's a grants program that can be allocated and actually get a bit of a flywheel effect going here. Otherwise, we'll have another Mapathon and another Mapathon and another Mapathon. But what could we create as structure that handles this as one structure and it does it forever?
Yeah, I'm thinking about this too, and part of the story that I haven't been telling here is the story of the Territorial Foundation and how we're already creating a capacity for holding that territorial scale work, which was initially prototyped with the Barichara Regeneration Fund last year, where we had 30 million pesos, or about $8,000 US, which for those you don't know, I had raised $50,000 in crowdfunding, used $35,000 to buy a piece of land, which is now the Origen Lago Nature Reserve. And the other $15,000 we used to create an advisory council design a Barichara regeneration fund, and we funded 15 local projects. And as we did that, it started to grow into an invitation to learn about territorial foundations, to learn a network of, to join a network of what is now 7 territories in Colombia, where each territory has a founding team to create a territorial foundation, and Barichara is one of them, along with the area around Medellin, Florencia, Putumayo, Santa Marta, right around Bogota, and missing 2. There are 2 others. I'll remember them later. And basically, we're forming this national network of bioregions. Well, I would call them bioregions. They're organized as territorial foundations. But this gives us the opportunity to prototype a model of territorial scale governance that could manage funds in the way that you're talking about, Klaus, and then also replicate it in 6 other territories where people are setting up territorial foundations. And so one of the things that I hope to do with the funding that's coming from Gitcoin is to start prototyping, and then we're going to build up to a common lands model of landscape investment over 20 years. We're building toward that, where we could work, because we brought Willem Verweerd of Common Land Foundation. He was here about 2 months ago. We're building these relationships, is to prototype a model of bootstrapping for landscapes. So you don't need to have Willem Verweerd's connections in Amsterdam to set up your own common land. You actually could do it by going to the crypto community or going to other communities where there's decentralized forms of finance, but bootstrapping in a way where there's so much learning that as we learn to do it, we can replicate it for other territories. And we're talking about doing this with another element we have is we've received a 500,000 Regen token endowment from the Regen Foundation. So we're going to set up a validator staking node for Regen tokens, create a liquidity pool. And we're talking about doing the same with Ethereum, because I think we'd easily find 32 Ethereum to be able to set up a validator. And we're working with people from Regen Network to see how we could work across their networks with some of this. So I think what we need to do is just get enough of us together. We're trying to crack this challenge of how do you bootstrap a landscape investment fund? And like the guys at Basendow are another good example of people, or the Regenerative Community Land Trust Group, who are doing this. And luckily we have representatives of all those projects coming to ReFi Barichara. So I think we can host this as a dialogue. But I just want to name that this is one of the things we're going to try and figure out how to do. Evan, I see your hand up.
Yeah, go for it, Evan.
So this is something that I'm thinking about a lot with my project, and specifically, it's almost so ambitious that it's hard to say. But the idea is how to bootstrap and create passive sustainable income for regenerative products. And so one of the reasons I think Ripple, justifiably so, gets a reputation in the crypto space is the banker coin, right? But the idea is that paradoxically, if you can connect these collaborative, community-driven, regenerative finance projects to the global financial system, who are Babylon, the devil, evil, well, you already know, that's why we're here, right? But if there's a way to use that financial system as an engine to fund regenerative products, and I think I've figured out a mechanism essentially using collaborative yield farming. Ripple has some products where corporations don't want to own crypto or are legally prohibited from owning crypto, but still want to derive the benefits of cheap, fast cross-border payments and so forth. And so Ripple has a few products where they basically lend out the crypto and also stuff like participating in liquidity pools and deriving yield from that. And so the idea is eventually to create some kind of DAO type organization that is connected to community projects exactly like this one, which I was so grateful for when I first came in this meeting. It's like, this is what I've been looking for. But the idea is that that if we can hook up projects like this one and community investment where people reinvest their money into the project, and then that money gets basically lent out and used by the big evil global financial system, then that would provide a sustainable source of income. And so the Regen network, it's so cool to me that I'm meeting people that are involved in these projects that I've been like geeking out over for the last couple of months, and this is just beautiful. But so that's a perspective that I'd like to explore more as I come to this and talk to you people, is learn more about how we can use this. The global economy is such a driver of inequality and suffering and extraction, and to somehow paradoxically use that to regenerate the system instead of further degrade it is something that I'm really interested in exploring. So anyway, I felt inspired to speak. Sorry for ranting.
That was beautiful, Evan.
Yeah,
And
go on, Seth.
Good rant.
that was beautiful, Evan, and Joe. The idea of the sustainable funding, I'd love to call out. Ecolab's partnered with Spirals, which is similar. Joe, you mentioned running a validator and having. This might be a great place to also kind of double up the staking rewards, and these kind of leverage these blockchain infrastructure pieces towards these regenerative projects. We've partnered with Spirals does this through they're taking the yield from the delegators side, the people who are staking to the pools. You'd be actually, if you're running a validator, you're also getting then the yield from operating that, and we could actually do both, where the delegates are and the validator are both contributing to regenerative projects, and there's a huge opportunity there. So I think there is the potential for sustainable long-term funding coming from these types of things, and this is what we'll be definitely piloting some of these initiatives during our stay in Barichara. So I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, and just to stress that I have zero interest in creating a fiefdom. So I'm not trying to do this against anyone else's projects. I'm just going to name that. This is the time where we've got to figure out how to collaborate deeply. It's sort of like we have one moonshot, and this is it. Sometime between now and 2030, we have to have a network of collaboration across bioregions, because by 2030 is when we're going to be entering into the worst of the collapse that is occurring, which will then last for a few decades. And so we'll have a really hard time setting up this infrastructure after. As we've all seen, we're already crossing abrupt climate change tipping points every other week right now. When we start having bread baskets of the world collapse and other things like that, it'll start to be too late to build this. So we have to have it built before, which is why now is the moment. And so just stressing that it's really nice that everything that enables us to do it is coming together just at the last moment we could possibly do it. As a sort of like, a good Hollywood adventure movie. It's sort of like that, just by happenstance. But I wanted to stress that because I don't say, I'm going to go and create my own validator and then like, oh shit, there's this other one. Well, there's another one, we'll partner, damn it. Let's get this done right. So I just wanted to say that up front. And also the comments that Leanne was making about international development banks. I've actually seen really good things come out of international development banks, alongside really horrible things. It's sort of like the World Bank is this amazing paradox of horrible and fantastic. And the international development banks are one of the most, they're sort of like the global version of ag extensions in the US in a way, where if you build the infrastructure that can receive it, there are groups like the Landscape Finance Lab. I don't know if you guys know about them. They used to be part of World Wildlife Fund, but they don't bring less than $100 million to a landscape. And when I was talking with them earlier this year, they said that there's like $1 trillion in carbon markets that just sits and can't go anywhere because there's not local organized capacity to implement.
Right.
So if we can create local organized capacity at the landscape scale, which is what bootstrapping these landscapes can do, we will bridge to the global carbon markets and the international development banks, and then to the reinsurance companies. And the reinsurance companies are the ones that back the insurance companies when the disasters are too big. Like $1 billion hurricane comes through or something, all the insurance companies fail and the reinsurance companies, so like Munich Re, Swiss Re, companies like them, that would very strongly back something like this. But we'd have to have infrastructure and a track record. So we're bootstrapping towards something that's got a future if we can get it done in time. So I think that the challenge right now is to find a way to bootstrap landscapes, like to actually get it done, which is like, maybe a few $1 million per landscape or equivalent in each country, and having local teams organized and capacitated to integrate their territories. So that's really what this game is about in the big picture. My question right now is, for the sake of the Mapathon, we've been here for a little more than 2 hours. We could keep going in projects, but I suspect that we've mapped enough projects to already start getting a sense of how they might be integrating, even though there's a lot more projects we could talk about. And I'm curious, because I also will need to go in a few minutes to take my daughter to a theater production at Ojo de Agua. But I have a question, just what thoughts and reflections do you all have about how this Mapathon has gone? Like, what have you learned? What do you see emerging? How does this feed into the physical event, October 3rd through 7th and beyond? I'm just curious what you guys are seeing and feeling from these last 2 hours. Anyone who'd like to share?
I might jump in and jump on the back of what you said and then launch into this new one. So on that topic of development finance, I know I'm very new to this group, so I'll make this really quick. Thank you, Gmo, for the intro. But basically, my PhD is looking at exactly that. It's looking at how do we create something that development finance institutions can use that actually supports regenerative development and these project level activities that are going on. So anything and everything that comes up through this process and then expanding that out to Columbia Regenerativa more broadly, that's really where I'll be leaning in and delving. So if there's anything that you guys notice being intimately involved in this space where there's things that aren't working or that could use additional investigation, I guess, please let me know. Happy to delve wherever the delving is required. Not a tech savvy person, so I say that not based on the Web3 stuff, but yeah, just the other stuff. And in terms of how this goes, I think I was a bit surprised that there weren't Colombians sort of present. I mean, sorry, Dave, you aside, but I mean from the region present, largely because I had no idea what I was coming in for. But you'd mentioned there was a phase 1, which was sort of the bringing together of those local groups and mapping things out. And I think I just anticipated that some of them would be present. That was the only sort of initial, thing I thought was important.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Kate. Just a really quick comment on that front. We have quite a blend of people here doing work in the territory. Some of them are bilingual and a lot of them aren't. And one of the things we're working to figure out we're really doing the ReFi Barichara event, at least the initial motivation was Cosmoverse and DevCon, 2 of the biggest crypto events in the world, are both happening in Colombia this year with a 1-week gap in between. Let's see if we can change the crypto world by having those crypto people who spend too much time on their computers come and actually experience a land-based immersion. That was the beginning of this. And that was sort of like the opportunity we took advantage of, which means it was mostly global North English speakers who sit on their computers. No offense to that, but that's where it was focused, sort of helping bring them into a different kind of coherence, which means that the community process that's happening in Barichara, which is deep and rich and nuanced, and most of it is not in English. Most of it can't be done in English because people don't speak English. We're not yet sure what all connections we can even make between what happens at our event in a few weeks and this. So this is like a big messy experiment of that. But one of the things we did do is there are 2 amazing women you'll get to meet, Natalia and Yvonne, who are both bilingual and are both like world-class change makers. They're the ones who made it possible to have a volunteer interview people from these 12 projects in Spanish, and then I translated them into English for the Mapathon. And they'll be designing the immersion experiences out into the field. And they'll be co-presenting in parts of the event. And you'll start to get more of a sense of the capacities that they as individuals bring. But really, a lot of the people in the community won't be able to participate because they just don't speak English. And so that's a limitation of throwing together an event for Cosmoverse and DevCon. But maybe that gives a bit more sense of why you showed up to a bunch of English speakers and no Colombians except Day. That's basically why that happened. Are there other thoughts or comments that anyone would like to share?
I'm curious if you have connections with any registered nonprofit entities in the United States, so that if people want to, who are based in the US, want to donate money that eventually makes its way to Barichara, but still get tax deductible donations attached to that. Do you have any links with US based organizations?
Yes, we have fiscal sponsorship with Possible Planet based out of New Jersey. They're members of the Earth Regenerators community. Was there something more you wanted to say?
No, I was going to say,
Oh, and Rachel's sitting there like, I can answer that question. She's sitting over to the side. So yes, and we also have, we're setting up our own foundation in Barichara, but it's a community process. So we're going at the speed of community. But we have a national foundation called Territorial, which is chartered to provide supports for the development of the network of territorial foundations in Colombia. And we have a fiscal sponsorship agreement with them that they can manage money on our behalf until our foundation is set up. There are other local nonprofits in Barichara, like the money for the theater is going directly to Fundación Ojo de Agua, because that's a Colombian chartered nonprofit. But for the territory in general, we have Territoria, which is a foundation based in Bogota, and we have Possible Planet that's chartered in New Jersey. So yeah, so we've already built that pipeline. But we're also open to forming all kinds of creative alliances. So if you have a nonprofit that's aligned around specific things we might do, or if you have other ideas in mind, what we're doing is big enough, in vision at least, that it's going to require a lot more alliances than one. So we can definitely talk more about that. Any other comments or questions that people have that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I'll jump in briefly. So this is my first kind of deep dive into this project. I just kind of really became aware of it maybe a week and a half ago. Bit like drinking from the fire hose. And also it was really good for someone who's really has not much understanding coming into it to understand the scale and complexity of this. So from that perspective, this mapping event has been helpful for me.
Thank you, Shane. I'm glad to hear that. I know it is overwhelmingly complex, just legitimately, which is why we have to create frameworks of collective intelligence, capacities to collaborate that create cohesive, integrative insights without too much detail, because the details are what will overwhelm us. And then have the details available when we dive in, when that's needed. So yeah, thank you for that. Are there other questions or comments or just general emotional sentiments? Like, how many of you are coming to ReFi Barichara? How many of you are going to come and use the digital nomad visa to stay with us longer term afterwards, which will be legally available in 4 days to apply for, and other such things. Anyway, that's a plug for the future. But are there any other comments before we close?
I wanted to share mostly observing. I find these group processes very frustrating for me emotionally. I observe patterns and flows that I think could go better than they do, but I don't know necessarily that I actually know that. And my tendency to get a little emotionally dysregulated can interfere with that whole process. So I tend to step back unless I'm really clear that there's something I can say or contribute. So it was good to practice being in that kind of space again and see some new faces that I don't know, like seeing you, Shane, after meeting you on Twitter, through Twitter, and then some other faces I have seen a few times. And so, yeah, I enjoyed the discomfort of this group collaboration experience, and I look forward to another one.
Well, Stephen, we're going to do more of those when you're here. It's going to be great.
Thank you, sir. May I have another?
Thank you, sir. May I have another? Oh my God, that's a reference. Thank you, Rachel, for bringing that in.
And aged myself.
Seb, or I guess Klaus has already had to leave. Seb, do you have any closing comments you would like to share? Or maybe about next steps or what we're going to do with the Mapathon?
I have one as well. Yeah, just
you're still here. Wonderful.
Yeah, and I'll drop off. Well, I'm here at the end. I know it was too engaging. I hadn't actually considered that the Mapathon, just the output of what we were creating into Miro, I was seeing as kind of primary, but it just got as actually a meta mapping, which is in the minds of all of the people present here, that they get to map their relationship to this piece of work. And I didn't just realize that now. That's kind of cool when you said what you said, Shane, that it's what was complex. Now you at least have like a map of what it is. So that's pretty cool. And the other piece is, what do we do from here? How do we harvest the work that we did and then bridge it to the on the ground experience that's going to happen from October 3rd onwards? And myself, Seb, and Joe can talk about how we do that. That's actually most valuable for that piece. Yeah. Over to you, Steve.
I would
Yeah, volunteer.
say that I would throw this idea out there that we may consider doing another one of these. Maybe doing a few more of these projects. Maybe keep it a little bit shorter, finish up giving more context here, and then something that I wanted to spend some time doing is, as a group, going through and reviewing all of, because we essentially use this time to share our perspectives and our insights into this mirror board. And now what's really would be really powerful is to go back and spend time reviewing as a group. And something I had added in here was these little green dots that we can kind of move over to the sticky notes that we resonate with, and have some clarity on just what actionable next steps might look like. And then of course we have the in-person event where we can really come back to this and use that as a resource during the event to help make sense of all that's happening in Barichara, and start making those connection pieces to ReFi projects in Web3 and the idea of implementing DAOs or community currencies, etc. We can start doing design sessions from that, or during the ReFi Barichara, using this map as an anchor. So I'm really excited for that. But yeah, I'd like to propose, if there's an appetite for it, if we want to fit it into our schedules, in scheduling another hour and a half maybe event to kind of follow up and finish out a few more of these projects and then review them.
Yeah, I would, just to bring us to a close and building on that, I would say I think that sounds like a nice idea. And what we could do is, I'm not sure how Dandelion works, if you have the email list of people who'd signed up, or if we just go back to the list that we have here to invite people and see if we can find a time that works for most of us at least, even if we can't find a time that works for all, or if it's possible that not all wouldn't be able to participate. What I see is really important here is that this mapping process is actually never going to end. And so it's just recognizing that when we do this kind of bioregional scale work, the project we're doing here in Barichara is at least for the next 200 years. Just recognizing how big these projects really are, and that we need to stabilize a regional climate system and other things. It's going to take a while. And so the key I see in all of this is just how do we prepare ourselves to feel like we're part of this as we move forward in whatever way makes sense for each of us. So what I want to invite is that, especially for all of you who are coming to ReFi Barichara, to just start reflecting on, and we will have a video recording of this that we'll share, so you'll be able to come back and watch it if you like. Reflect on how would you participate in processes that are this complex, knowing that you're only seeing a tiny sliver of what's going on here, and it's already so complex. How do we hold the complexity? How do we hold it together so that we can create coherence for it? And how does the way we create coherence for it include those who don't speak the local language, those who may never set foot within the territory, all the ways we may build models that work across territories, even if they're in places we never go? And what does all this mean? And so I just wanted to invite the reflection on that, because I feel like if we're really successful with ReFi Barichara, there are two things that'll happen. One is that this kind of mapping will become normal, that people doing work in the ReFi space or in their own territories will increasingly work with this kind of complexity and nuance. And the other is that people who come to our event from Cosmoverse and then go on to DevCon will change the conversation at DevCon. So all those people that go to Bogota to talk about Ethereum and this larger framework of crypto would be like, what the fuck, guys? If you're not going and talking to campesino farmers or working with the ladies transforming their food systems, what the hell are you doing? That basically we have a real world reality check to what we should be doing here. And that these tools are only ever going to be useful if we give them a way to touch the ground. And so, so I'm hoping that we can achieve that during the 5 days, that it's powerful enough in contrast to conference halls in big cities, that people just decide that ReFi events of the future don't look like that. They look like this. And so I just want to invite you to reflect on that. And of course, use the Telegram group for the ReFi Barichara event to share ideas about what's coming up for you from this and how it informs the way you would like to experience the event. Because my intention is to hold an emergent process for the event. I'm an emergent facilitator, which means our agenda will be to have immersive transformational experiences. And then, can you guys still hear me or did I lose you?
We can hear you.
Okay, good. Didn't know if I locked up. To have immersive transformational experiences and then facilitate the emergence of the conversation around design workshops. That will be emergent, which simply means that we, just like we did today, we ascended to bootstrapping of landscape models. We will ascend to topics. We will arrive at topics that make sense as a workshop or as a design session. And we'll just keep iterating throughout the 5 days. So that by the end of the 5 days, we've experienced bioregional scale regenerative design. Even though in 5 days, we've only practiced the design part. We haven't actually put it into practice. And so that's all I wanted to say, is that I hope that this experience is a nice teaser of that just in the last 2.5 hours, we've held a great deal of complexity, and we can all sense that it's like dipping our toes into an ocean. And that by the end of this 5-day period in October, you will have a much stronger experiential sense of how to do this if you haven't done it before. And you'll probably still feel like you may not know how to continue doing it. And then we'll have to figure out how to hold these kinds of processes over and over again until we all get really good at it. Because we need a lot more of us to get really good at this for the next 10 years and beyond. So I really want to just give a huge shout out to Klaus and to Sev for offering to instigate this creative process and compel all the action around the mapping to get us to this point. It's wonderful that our interviews for mapping were done in Spanish so that we can actually give that back to the local community in their own language. That's part of what will come out of this, regardless of today's activity. And when we have the link for the video recording, I'm going to share it with our bilingual members of our Barichara team so that they know what happened here. And they can bring that back to the non-English speakers and start to share with them what we're doing. And so with that, I'd just like to say thank you all for coming and sharing the time. And thank you for getting a little glimpse of this place that I've fallen in love with, Barichara, Colombia, which, as you see when you come here, it's Barichara is the Guane word for the place of rest, because this has been a gathering place for rituals and ceremonies for at least 7,000 years. And the indigenous people did not live where the town is. They came here for ceremonies. So when you come to Barichara, you're coming to a sacred place. And you will feel that in the energy of the landscape, even though most of the indigenous people are gone because the genocide was mostly successful. Not entirely, but mostly. But you're going to feel it when you come here, that this is a place that the land will teach us better than any of us humans can. And so I'm looking forward to sharing that with all of you. So with that, thank you, everyone, and onward we go.
Thank you,
Thank
Joe.
you.
Everyone.
Thanks for the facilitation. Learned a lot.
Thank you so
Sí.
much.
Gracias a todos y nos vemos pronto en algunas semanas, for those who speak Spanish. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. In a few
I'll
weeks.
follow up with folks over email and see if we can organize another follow-up to this. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Thanks, everyone. Bye.